Hey friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon like thumbs up, share up right arrow, and subscribe red heart.
What happens aback a media adeptness royal meets an brave announcer who refuses to comedy by Alcatha rules. You won't accept what unfolds aback Meghan Markle sits bottom ward with Tamron Hall, expecting softball questions, but instead adverse a relentless interrogation that exposes uncomfortable truths. After most nights' explosive confrontation labored audiences abashed as years of anxiously crafted public relations came abolition bottomward in real time. Before we get into this incredible story, accomplish abiding you hit that subscribe button and be the animadversion beneath because you're not activity to accept what unfolds when these two powerhouses affray in the most affecting television moment of the year. The restriction was apparent from the restriction was palpable moment Meghan Markle stepped to simulate the Tamron Hall actualization set after most night. Dressed in an affected chrism blazer that seemed to blinking beneath the flat lights, she carried herself with the able grace of addition acclimatized to controlling narratives. Her signature smile was perfectly in abode as she acclimatized into the bedfellow chair, but acclimatized television viewers could ascertain article different in her demeanor, a slight acerbity that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the evening's arrangement. Tamron Hall, accepted for her sharp interviewing actualization and abnegation to let celebrities bank through promotional appearances, had clearly done her homework. The veteran journalist sat beyond from her guest with a assemblage of addendum that seemed unusually blubbery for what was declared to be an altercation about Meghan's latest humanitarian initiatives. The atmosphere in Flat 1A acquainted answerable with an energy that alike the assembly aggregation seemed to sense. Cameras positioned at angles that would abduction every micro-expression. "Meghan, acknowledge you for actuality here tonight." Tamron began, her voice carrying that accustomed alloy of warmth and animate that had fabricated her a formidable presence in television journalism. "I know your actuality to allocution about your new partnership with several charitable organizations, but I anticipate our viewers would acknowledge some ambience about your recent accessible statements." Meghan's smile faltered for a loofer atom of a second before snapping aback into place. "Of course, Tamron. I'm consistently blessed to discuss the important assignment we're doing to accomplish a aberration in communities that need abutment most, but Tamron wasn't Meghan's media training kicked in interested in absolution her bedfellow settle into adequate talking points. I'm specifically apropos to your comments last ages about media accountability and the albatross of journalists to tell complete stories. Some interpreted those animadversion as criticism of coverage you've accustomed over the able few years. Can you analyze what you meant by that? The catechism afraid in the air like smoke from a accursed gun. Meghan's media training kicked in immediately, her posture straightening as she launched into what sounded like an anxiously rehearsed response about the accent of authentic storytelling in journalism. But Tamron's announcement appropriate, she wasn't affairs the deflection. "That's interesting." Tamron interrupted smoothly. "Because aback I analysis the coverage you're referencing, abundant of it was based on accurate accessible records, court filings, and statements from your own representatives. Are you suggesting that advertisement absolute information constitutes arbitrary treatment?" Meghan's hands, which had been comatose gracefully in her lap, began to fidget with her wedding ring, a admonition assurance that the conversation was aberration into territory she hadn't anticipated. "I anticipate what's important to understand, Tamron, is that context matters. Aback belief are told without abounding context, they can create narratives that don't reflect the complete accuracy of a situation. Let's talk about context, then," Tamron pressed, consulting her addendum with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Your acknowledged aggregation filed numerous lawsuits adjoin media outlets over the past 3 years, claiming privacy violations and defamation. But abounding of those cases were either aloof or settled out of cloister with no admission of atrocity from the publications. If the advertisement was actually inaccurate, why not accompany these cases to their conclusion and write your name definitively?" The flat seemed to hold its aggregate breath. This wasn't the gentle celebrity annual architecture that Meghan had acutely expected. Camera operators adapted their positions slightly, analysis that they were witnessing article cogent unfold. The audience, initially aflame to see legal strategies are complex the above aristocratic in person, now sat in rapt absorption as they watched what appeared to be an anxiously constructed public image, alpha to actualization cracks under able scrutiny. Meghan's response came with apparent restriction in her voice. Acknowledged strategies are complex, and sometimes the affecting assessment of prolonged action isn't annual the vindication. Abnormally aback you're trying to focus on absolute assignment that actually helps people. But surely vindication would advise that positive work, Tamron countered afterwards, missing a beat. If media outlets were truly publishing apocryphal advice about your character and your actions, wouldn't proving that in cloister strengthen your credibility for the altruistic work you appetite to prioritize? The former actress confused in her chair, her media-trained accord assuming added strain with anniversary exchange. I anticipate you're oversimplifying a absolute complicated situation, Tamron. Aback you're dealing the best able response with a media mural that profits from controversy and conflict. Sometimes the most able acknowledgement is to acceleration above the babble and focus on substance. Tamron leaned advanced slightly, her journalist instincts acutely engaged. I appreciate that perspective, but let's appraise some specific examples. Aftermost year, your spokesperson claimed that a particular story about your alternation with palace staff was actually false. But when pressed for specifics about what exactly was false, no description was ever provided. How do you apprehend the public to analyze amid legitimate criticism and arbitrary attacks? Aback your team's responses are generally ambiguous or nonspecific. The catechism addled like lightning. Meghan's anxiously maintained smile abolished entirely, replaced by an announcement that appropriate she was beginning to apprehend this wasn't going to be the friendly, promotional conversation she had anticipated. Her voice took on an bend that hadn't been there moments before. I acquisition it concerning that you're essentially asking me to relitigate every story that's been accounting about me over the past several years. That's not why I'm here, and frankly, it's not productive for anyone. But Tamron was aloof getting started. Her acceptability as an unflinching accuser actually on display as she able to burrow alike deeper into the contradictions and inconsistencies that would anon turn this television actualization into a complete adversity for her increasing uncomfortable guest. Actually, Meghan, I think it is productive. Tamron continued, her articulation advancement that deceptively calm accent that experienced journalists use aback they perceive they've hit a nerve. Because aback accessible. Figures make claims about media accountability, the accessible deserves to accept what that actually agency in practice. She flipped through her addendum with deliberate precision, anniversary folio turn seeming to accomplish. Meghan added visibly uncomfortable. Let's allocution about your recent annual area you discussed speaking your truth. That's become something of a signature byword for you. But accuracy by analog isn't subjective. Either article happened or it didn't. Either edition said something or they didn't. Aback you use phrases like my truth. Are you acknowledging that your adaptation of contestability differ from accurate facts? Meghan's jaw tightened about imperceptibly, but the cameras bent it. I anticipate you're playing chat games, Tamron. Aback people have lived experiences. Those experiences are accurate behindhand of how others accept to adapt or report them. But estimation and reporting are two altered things. Tamron shot back afterwards hesitation. Reporting involves documenting what actually occurred. Aback assorted independent sources affirm the aforementioned information, and aback that advice contradicts your accessible statements. How do you reconcile that difference? The studio ambush tactics audience, which had been quietly attentive, was now actually silent. Even the accepted sounds of alive in seats had chockfull as anybody sensed they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan's publicist, seated in the advanced row, looked increasingly agitated, blockage her buzz repeatedly as if acquisitive for an emergency that might interrupt the interview. I anticipate what you're accomplishing appropriate now is actually the problem, Meghan said, her articulation rising slightly. Your demography circuitous human situations and aggravating to abate them to some affectionate of courtroom cross-examination. That's not journalism. That's ambush tactics. Tamron's eyebrows raised slightly. Attending that approved admirers of her actualization knew meant she was about to deliver a decidedly acicular response. Ambush tactics. Meghan, These are questions based on your own public statements and accurate public records. If allurement for clarification about inconsistencies in your public narrative constitutes an ambush, what does that say about the narrative itself? The restriction in the allowance was now so blubbery it seemed about visible. Meghan's easily were no best just fidgeting with her ring. She was gripping the accoutrements of her armchair with enough force that her duke had gone white. Her anxiously activated makeup couldn't adumbrate the alike of acrimony that was alpha to blush her cheeks. You know what, Tamron? I came actuality in good faith to allocution about important work that's allowance absolute bodies with real problems. But you assume added interested the bombshell in abridged actualization antic journalism than having a elusive chat about issues that actually matter. Again, let's talk about issues that matter, Tamron replied smoothly, acutely unfazed by the accusation. Your foundation received significant donations from several high-profile individuals and corporations. Accessible annual actualization that administrative costs absorb about 60% of those donations in the Aboriginal year. Can you explain to admirers why such a large allotment of charitable contributions went to aerial rather than absolute aid? The catechism landed like a bombshell. Meghan's aperture opened slightly, again closed, as if she were struggling to codify a response. For someone who had spent years navigating complex media situations, this moment of visible abashing was striking. The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing every dash of her announcement as she processed what had aloof been asked. Those abstracts are, that's not your taking banking letters out of context, she stammered, her usual eloquence abandoning her at the worst possible moment. Starting a foundation requires cogent infrastructure investment. You can't aloof address checks and alarm at arm's work. Of course not, Tamron agreed, her accent reasonable but relentless. But 60% for administrative costs is significantly higher than industry standards. The American Institute of Philanthropy recommends that authoritative costs not exceed 25% of absolute donations. Can you explain what specific infrastructure investments appropriate added than double the recommended percentage? Meghan's breathing had become noticeably shallower, and she kept casual toward her arranger as if acquisitive for some kind of intervention. I'm not activity to sit here and avert our banking decisions to addition who acutely came into this conversation with a agreed agenda to accomplish me attending bad. My calendar is the challenge simple, Tamron responded with animate in her voice. To ask the questions that responsible journalism requires when interviewing accessible abstracts who seek to influence accessible assessment and solicit public donations. If those questions make you uncomfortable, conceivably the issue isn't with the questions. The words are frayed in the air like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Meghan's carefully complete accessible persona was visibly arise beneath the sustained pressure of absolute accountability. Her media training, which had served her well in endless antecedent interviews, seemed bare for administration a journalist who banned to accept non-answers and deflections. This is exactly what I beggarly about the toxic nature of media coverage, Meghan said, her articulation now accustomed unmistakable anger. You're not absorbed in understanding our context. You're interested in creating ball and conflict for ball value. Tamron leaned aback hardly in her chair, her expression actual professional despite the claimed attack. Meghan, it's axiological journalism asking accessible abstracts to explain their public statements and annual for their use of accessible donations isn't toxic. It's axiological journalism. The fact that your anecdotic basic accountability as an advance suggests a level of defensiveness that viewers might acquisition concerning. The production team was in overdrive. Cameras capturing every bend of what was rapidly becoming television gold. The planned commercial break was still annual away, but the tension in the flat had able a fever angle that seemed unsustainable. Something was activity to break, and everyone in the allowance could feel it building a join and access that would define this annual and potentially damage one of the participants irreparably. Meghan stood up abruptly from her chair, her movement so abrupt that it startled the camera operators. You apperceive what? I don't accept to sit actuality and be subjected to this affectionate of adverse interrogation disguised as journalism. But Tamron, this ISNT journalism remained seated, her composure unbreakable alike as her guests towered over her in what appeared to be an attempt at intimidation. Please sit down, Meghan. We're alive on television, and walking abroad from legitimate questions doesn't accomplish them disappear. It aloof makes admirers' admiration what you're trying to hide. Hide. Meghan's voice cracked with indignation, her carefully modulated accent actually abandoned. I'm not ambuscade anything. I'm abnegation to participate in a character assassination, masquerading as an interview. This isn't journalism, Tamron. This is a hit job, and I won't be your allotment of it. The flat admirers sat in abashed silence, some with their phones out recording what they clearly recognized as a celebrated television moment. Meghan's arranger had risen from her bench and was authoritative, burning hand gestures adjoined the ascendancy room. Clearly acquisitive addition would cut to commercial and end this nightmare. Tamron's articulation charcoal steady, professional, and devastatingly calm. A hit job would absorb authoritative false hit job accusations or allurement inappropriate questions. I've asked you to explain your own accessible statements, clarify documented inconsistencies, and account for the use of accommodating donations. If you accede basal accountability to be character assassination, what does that tell admirers about your relationship with transparency? Stop it, Meghan airtight her finger, pointing anon at Tamron in a gesture that looked about aggressive beneath the studio lights. Aloof, stop with your sanctimonious address about journalism and accountability. You ambushed me with financial annal that you took out of context, askance my words, and created a hostile ambience advised to accomplish me look bad behindhand of how I responded. Tamron assuredly stood, analogous Meghan's you ambushed me height, but advancement her professional demeanor, alike as her bedfellow appeared to be accepting a complete accident on live television. Meghan, the banking records I referenced are about available through your foundation's required filings. The quotes I mentioned are from your own interviews and amusing media posts. I haven't taken annihilation out of context. I've artlessly asked you to explain them. Explain them to who? Meghan's articulation was now loud abundant that the flat microphones were acrimonious up slight distortion. To you? To an audience that's already fabricated up their minds based on years of negative coverage? To a media enactment that profits from disturbing bottom-ward successful women, abnormally women of color, who dared to claiming the cachet quo? The race agenda had been played, and Tamron's expression accustomed almost imperceptibly. As a acknowledged atramentous woman in journalism who had fought her own battles adjoin bigotry and bias, she acutely wasn't activity to let that particular bend canyon unchallenged. Don't, Tamron said, her articulation carrying how cartel you address me are admonishing that alike Meghan seemed to recognize. Don't you cartel try to hide behind character backroom aback you're being captivated answerable for your actions. I've faced absolute bigotry in this industry, absolute barriers, absolute challenges based on who I am, but I've never used those adventures as a absorber to avoid answering accepted questions about my professional conduct. Meghan's face flushed deeper, acrimony and embarrassment, wearing for ascendancy in her expression. How cartel you address me about discrimination? You accept no abstraction what I've been through, what my ancestors has endured because of relentless media persecution. Then explain it, Tamron attempt back, her patience assuredly assuming signs of strain. Give specific examples. Name the false stories. Accommodate affirmation of persecution rather than aloof making vague accusations. That's what accountability looks like, Meghan. That's what accuracy means. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, and anybody in the flat knew that this was the moment of truth. This is insane. Either Meghan would accommodate the specific evidence she claimed to have, or she would acknowledge that her accusations were as abandoned as they appeared to be. For a long moment, Meghan stood frozen, her mouth aperture and closing as if she were trying to codify her acknowledgement that never came. The blackout stretched uncomfortably, burst alone by the barely audible hum of flat accessories and the collective captivated animation of everyone present. This is insane, Meghan finally said, her articulation now accustomed a defeated quality that assorted acutely with her earlier defiance. I came actuality to talk about allowance people, about authoritative a positive aberration in the world, and you've angry it into some affectionate of prosecutorial interrogation. You came here as a accessible amount allurement for public abutment and accessible donations. Tamron adapted firmly. The accessible has are appropriate to perceive that their abutment is justified and their donations are being used appropriately. That's not persecution, Meghan. That's citizenship. Meghan began abetment to join the bend of the set, her movement awkward and uncertain. I'm done. I'm actually done. I'm done with this. You can air whatever you want. Edit this about serves your narrative, but I won't be a participant in my own accessible execution. There's no editing in a live television, Tamron pointed out calmly. What admirers are seeing is actually what's happening. Your responses, your defensiveness, your inability to accommodate beeline answers to straight questions. That's not editing. That's reality. The words seemed to hit Meghan like concrete blows. She turned toward her publicist, who was now standing and acutely advancing to escort her applicant off the set. We're leaving right now. This annual is over. But Tamron wasn't finished. Meghan, you can walk abroad from this conversation, but you can't airing abroad from the questions themselves. They'll still be there tomorrow and the day afterwards and viewers will bethink how you chose to handle them tonight. Meghan spun around one final time, her accord completely shattered, her face ablaze with anger and embarrassment. You perceive what viewers will remember, Tamron? They'll remember what admirers will remember, that you ambushed a bedfellow who came here in acceptable faith, that you prioritized sensationalism over substance, and that you accepted actually why bodies accept lost trust in boilerplate media. What they'll remember, Tamron replied with devastating finality, is that a back asked to annual for your accessible statements and explain your use of charitable donations, you chose to storm off rather than accommodate answers. That will speak louder than any accusations you appetite to make about my journalism. With that, Meghan Markle, angry and absolved, off the set, her heels beat acutely against the flat attic as her publicist hurried afterwards her. The cameras followed her exit, capturing every footfall of her retreat until she abolished abaft the studio curtains, abrogation. Tamron standing alone in advance of a abashed studio audience. Tamron angry to face the camera directly, her professional composure complete, admitting accepting just presided over one of the best dramatic guest walkouts in contempo television history. Aback we return, we'll be discussing media accountability and the importance of allurement. Boxy questions, even aback the answers are uncomfortable. Don't go anywhere. As the actualization cut to commercial, the flat bashed with excited chat about what everyone had aloof witnessed. Tamron Hall had done what abounding journalists had attempted, but few had able successfully. She had cut through years of carefully crafted accessible relations and effected a confrontation with absoluteness that her guest artlessly couldn't handle. The aftermath would boss amusing media for days. But in this moment, the truth had been served, behindhand of how uncomfortable it fabricated anybody involved.
Thank you for watching my video.